Hello, and welcome to the Miracle of Hickory virtual field trip. Today, my friends and I will take you on a journey through time as we explore the once prevalent disease of poliomyelitis. We will discuss the happenings of the time during World War II, and then learn more about the polio disease while examining artifacts of the polio exhibit at the Hickory History Center. We will visit the previous site of an historic polio hospital and learn about the treatment of polio. The conclusion of our tour will be an interview with Joyce Hofstetter, the author of Blue, a novel about the polio epidemic in Hickory, which will be referred to during this tour. To begin our tour, my friends Amy and Callie will take you back in time, all the way to World War II. Enjoy your tour!
After the bombing of Pearl Harbor, Americans united on the home front. At this time, men were sent overseas to fight in the war, so women had to step up and take the jobs that men previously had, like working in factories or working in the shipyards. Rosie the Riveter became the iconic symbol for women during this time to work hard during a time of change.
At this time, families also struggled with rationing that was going on throughout the country. Rationing was put in effect by the government to limit the purchase of items that were in short supply because soldiers needed them overseas. Ration goods were food, clothing, coffee, rubber, and gasoline. Families received ration booklets in which ration coupons were contained. In order to purchase the limited items, families would have to use the ration coupons. They were also given ration cookbooks to help with meals to use those rationed items. In order to help with the growing of the food, the government encouraged families to grow their own food in what became called victory gardens.
Families were also given ration stickers. The stickers were an A, B, C, M, T, or X, and the letter represented the number of gallons of gas that a family would receive each week. This letter B was given to families who would receive 8 gallons of gas in a week, and these were typically the ones who would work further away for the purpose of working jobs that were essential to the war front, like working in factories. The purpose of keeping people out of their cars and using less gas was to keep people off of their tires because rubber was rationed at the time.
In order to protect families from not having enough during the time of rationing, and to also make sure that factories were working efficiently for the war effort, the government set up what was called the Advisory Defense Committee. The government nominated people for this committee. This is an example of a certificate that someone who was nominated would receive.
Families did everything they could to help out with the war in their own households, including donating their kitchen grease. It sounds crazy, but kitchen grease was used as glycerin to make explosives for the war. In Blue, Ann Fay's town in Hickory is encouraged to donate their kitchen grease to help out from their own households.
Families donated more than just grease to the war effort. They would donate food, clothing, socks, and other items. In the prequel to book, Joyce Moyer Hofstetter's book, AIM, Junior donates his BB gun to the soldiers who are practicing war maneuvers on Baker's Mountain.
V-mail was the form of communication between loved ones overseas and their family members back home. Letters were written on a normal-sized sheet of paper, and then a picture was taken of the letter. That picture was then sent to its final destination and printed out, and it would look just like this. Notice how small it is. This was because it would save room and it would maintain secrecy from other nations. This is just like Ann Fay and her father did when they were exchanging mail back and forth from the home front in Hickory to where he was in the war.
Throughout our discussion about the home front, you've heard us talk a lot about the book Blue. Now, our friend Becca will tell you about the disease polio, which also is mentioned in the book.
Poliomyelitis, better known as polio, is a disease that enters the body through the mouth and enters the bloodstream through the intestines. It then works itself into the nervous system and brain, where it truly begins to take its toll. The disease was first referred to as infantile paralysis because of its symptoms and its prevalence in children. The initial symptoms of polio are similar to that of the flu: fatigue, fever, and nausea. Over time, the more serious symptoms set in and can include stiffness in the neck and pain in the limbs. Approximately 1 in 200 cases of polio led to irreversible paralysis in the legs, wherein which patients would need to use crutches, wheelchairs, and leg splints like the ones you see here. In rare cases, some patients were affected by bulbar polio, where the breathing and throat muscles would seize up, causing those patients to need assistance breathing through the use of an iron lung, which you will learn more about later today. Polio is extremely infectious and is caused through person-to-person contact. We now know that the virus is spread through feces. However, prior to this discovery, when knowledge of how the virus spread was unknown, communities would panic when polio was found in the area and would quarantine or isolate those affected. In some instances, like what we see with Bobby and Blue, toys and possessions were burned to limit the spread of the virus. We now know that using chamber pots and Johnny houses, both used as restrooms during this time, helped spread the virus from person to person. In some cases, patients experience what is known as post-polio syndrome. In these cases, patients experience muscle weakness 30 to 40 years after being treated for the polio virus. The process for determining a proper diagnosis of polio includes gathering cells from the throat or feces, or by getting spinal fluid from spinal tap, where doctors use a syringe to pull fluid from the spinal column. They use these cells and tissues to look for the presence of virus cells in the body. At the height of the outbreak in the US, a nationwide effort was started in order to try to find a cure to limit the epidemic from getting any worse. Franklin D. Roosevelt, the president during this time, who was also affected by the polio virus, began the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis in 1938. Its goal was to find a cure as well as to provide better treatment to those affected by polio. Over time, this foundation became known as the March of Dimes. It got this name after a radio spokesperson called for everyone to donate their spare change towards the cause. After a vaccine was finally found, the National Foundation led the charge in the campaign for immunization in the U.S. Immunization means that people are exposed to virus cells in a safe way that allows the body to build a natural defense against it, preventing infection. This is Dan Mallory. He acted as a poster boy for the March of Dimes to help encourage others to volunteer, as well as to donate what they could towards the cause. You can see from his use of crutches and leg splints that he too was affected by the polio virus. The National Foundation helped save thousands of lives, and while polio is no longer the organization's biggest concern, they are still doing excellent work today, raising funds and promoting research into protecting infants, ensuring each and every one has a fighting chance at life. The polio virus impacted the lives of so many and was a devastating disease to those affected. The hospital here in Hickory played a major role in helping those in the area who were suffering from polio, and my friend Jennifer will tell you more about this now.
It was 1944. Polio grew into epidemic proportions. Charlotte Memorial Hospital was already overflowing with polio patients. That was when local doctors decided that Catawba County Fresh Air Campsite was an ideal place for a polio hospital. In no time at all, the hospital was built within 54 hours. Although hit with this epidemic, the people of Hickory grew closer together. Volunteers, including Red Cross, Catawba County Health Department, companies from construction sites, as well as individuals pitched in. Some donated money, materials, toys, and transportation. Others donated time. For example, Wilkesboro attorney T.R. Bryan brought his son John to the polio hospital. Later, nurses spotted him scrubbing pots and pans. When asked, he stated that the people here helped my son, so in return, I want to help as well. Local farmers brought in fruits and vegetables. The ladies of Hickory brought food from their victory garden. WHKY radio sent the call out for electric fans. The undergarment that the polio patients wore was made by a local women's group. Polio Pete, which was a famous celebrity during that time, which little was known about him, always stayed at the children's ward. On March 9th, 1945, the remaining 88 patients were sent back to Charlotte on a 2-mile-long caravan, going 30 miles an hour. Due to the fast pace of the hospital construction, efforts of volunteers, and high success rate of the hospital's treatment, this became known as the Miracle of Hickory. You probably passed this location before in Hickory. J.C. Park is the former location of where the polio hospital used to be. The stone building of the hospital was later replaced with an armory for the United States Army Reserve. Now we'll go back to the Hickory History Center, where Sam will tell us about the treatment.
The treatments and the volunteerism both played major roles in making this event so remarkable. Since the vaccine had not yet been developed, doctors, nurses, and community members had to work around the clock to ensure patient care. Those who had polio in their lungs made it extremely difficult and nearly impossible for them to breathe. A treatment used was the iron lung, as you see here. This one was used for infants. They would be placed inside and pressure would be created around their bodies, forcing air in and out of their lungs, helping them breathe. Another treatment was used called the kidney treatment. This was used if they had polio in their arms and in their legs. A woolen rag would have been soaked in boiling water in this container. It would be then wrapped around their arm, as you see here, and used to relax their muscles so that nurses could exercise their arms and strengthen the muscles that they had weakened. After these therapies were finished, therapy would also continue in other ways. A harmonica was used for kids to play with, or at least they thought they were playing. The doctors would see how strong or how weak their lungs were by how hard or how weak they would blow in and out of the harmonica. Another treatment that was used for therapy was the fingerboard therapy treatment. Kids would practice walking their fingers up and down the board like this by exercising the muscles in their arms, in their hands, and in their fingers. Although patients were being treated with polio, regardless of their skin color, it's very important to remember that segregation was still very much enforced during this time. At first, all patients were kept together, whether they were white or of color. But then a few people noticed this and thought that it was very inappropriate, thus the separation began. If you were not very sick, you were segregated. However, those who were receiving the intense treatment, such as the iron lung, were not segregated. This policy also applied to the staff. Black nurses and white nurses could treat any patient regardless of the color of their skin. However, they could not travel to work together in the same vehicles, they could not eat in the same buildings, and they could not sleep in the same buildings if they had to stay at work overnight. Although polio has been documented to be around for hundreds of years, the United States did not see its first outbreak until 1894 with 132 cases. We did not see a second outbreak until 1916 in New York City with 27,000 cases. A third outbreak wasn't until 1946, between then and 1950, with over 60,000 cases. This is also the time period that the book Blue was written about. It wasn't until 1955 that a vaccine was developed by Jonas Salk. This was the first successful vaccine. The second vaccine was developed in 1961 by Albert Sabin. This oral vaccine was a droplet inside the mouth that is still being used today around the world in places that medical attention is hard to come by. You've heard us talk about the book Blue by Joyce Moyer Hofstetter several times throughout this field trip. Now Eden is going to take you on a personal interview with the author of the book.
We are fortunate enough to be able to sit down with Joyce Moyer Hofstetter, the author of Blue, which you've heard a lot about so far on this field trip. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I'm excited.
So what inspired you to write this story? Do you have any personal experience with polio?
I do not have personal experience with polio. I signed up for a history writing workshop with Highlights Foundation, and before I went to the class, I received a homework assignment to research a story that happened in my backyard 50 years ago or more. And I called the History Museum. Ta-da, this place. and asked for suggestions, and the man who answered the phone said, "What about the miracle of Hickory?" And so I began to research and fell in love with the story of tragedy and compassion that arose from his community, and decided to write a fictional character into that story.
So through your research, did you use any primary sources, and if so, what kinds did you consult?
I leaned heavily on the Hickory Daily Record, the Charlotte Observer, the Newton Enterprise, and a newspaper from Greensboro, just for the kind of real-time information about the hospital that my characters would have had access to. But I also interviewed people who had polio, and I consider them the real experts, the people who added the emotional depth to the story and the experience of what polio was like. And I read memoirs, and there were some movies. One of the patients you may have seen downstairs in the exhibit, one of the patients' father took with his 8mm film, images from the hospital and the treatments and all of that, and so I had access to that and to a March of Dimes video as well.
Awesome. So which character in the book do you most connect with personally, and why?
I think Anne Faye Honeycutt. I think that feisty spirit that she had to have to survive all that she went through comes a lot from inside of me. But I also think that, I don't always feel feisty, and I don't always feel strong. And on those days, Anne Faye inspires me. I tell myself, if Anne Faye could do it, I can do it.
So through writing this book, I'm sure you've developed a favorite part of the book. Do you mind reading us an excerpt?
Favorite is hard for me because I think there's a right answer, and I don't know. I have so many favorite parts of the book. Well, okay, so I think one of my favorite aspects of the book is the relationship between Anne Faye and Imogene. Just that opportunity that she had, this white girl, to experience diversity and to make a friend that she would not have made otherwise. So those parts of the story are my favorites. And they're hinted at in the prologue, which is what I will read.
Awesome.
Okay. If you ask folks around here what they remember about the year 1944, a child might say, "That was the year my daddy went off to fight Hitler." A mother might look off towards Baker's Mountain and whisper that polio snatched up one of her young'uns. And the Hickory Daily Record will say that my hometown gave birth to a miracle. If anyone knows about them things, it's me, Anne Faye Honeycutt, for sure. But if you ask me what I remember, I will say it was the year I put on overalls and become the man of the house. It was the summer that wisteria turned enemy on me, and I made best friends with a colored girl. It was the fall when Franklin D. Roosevelt was elected to his 4th term in office. I will say it was the time in my life when I learned that all of us is fragile as a mimosa blossom. But I also learned that it mostly hurts at first.
Thank you so much. So beautifully written. And you have other books that are in a series with Blue. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So after I wrote Blue, I turned to another project, a story set in Hawaii, and I published that. And Anne Faye kept talking in my head. She wouldn't let go of me, and I wanted to know what happened next. And so I began to work on a sequel, which is Comfort. Comfort is the story of life after polio and the adjustments that were involved, but it's also the story of life after war and war's effects on the family. So I wrote Comfort, and then I moved to 2 other projects. Both bombed. I mean, I loved them. I researched. I spent a lot of energy on them, but the publisher did not love them. And so the second time when my editor had to turn me down, she said, "The publisher would like you to consider a sequel, a prequel to Blue. And it should start with the letter A, so that we have A, B, and C for Comfort." So I thought that was a rather odd idea, but I don't know anything about marketing. And they were offering to give me a contract if I gave them a good proposal, so I went with it. And I wrote AIM, the story of Junior Bledsoe and Faye's neighbor boy, who figures prominently into Blue and Comfort. And this is his story of family dysfunction and war on the home front as America is getting into the war, the year 1941.
Awesome. So do you have any current projects, maybe another one in the series?
I might have a D book in the series. Yes, so you may remember from reading Blue that there are twins.
Right.
So right now I'm living with the twins. And the title, the working title is Drive. Involves a little NASCAR, a little Hickory Speedway history, but it's really about that personal drive and a sense of competition that these twins have with each other and that we all have with other human beings, and about self-worth aside from how we compare to other people.
So it's definitely something we should be on the lookout for.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
A year from this fall.
You heard it, folks. So if you enjoyed Blue, you should check out her other books. And thank you so much for sitting with us.
Thank you. It was a pleasure, Eden.
Thank you for joining us on this journey to learn about polio and the miracle that happened here in Hickory.
If you have the chance, please come visit the Hickory History Center in person.
Here you can learn more about the polio outbreak and the incredible work so many did to help those affected. Additionally, if you haven't already, you should check out Joyce Moyer Hostetter's book, Blue.
This is an historical fiction story that takes place in Hickory during the outbreak of polio in World War II.
We hope you have enjoyed your virtual journey, as we have certainly enjoyed sharing this inspirational story with you.
My thanks to y'all for reading the book, Blue, and to the History Museum especially for providing a context for exploring the polio epidemic.
My name is Kendall Reese, and I'm the site manager here at the Harper House Hickory History Center, and I hope you'll come visit now that you've seen the video online.